With some of the additional changes in 2.4, there are definitely some fun builds to be found. But after doing some tests last night on Twitch, it's pretty obvious one of the most improved was the Druid Summoner, going from objectively terrible to actually fairly functional. While it will never truly be on par with the Necromancer Summoner in terms of speed due to a lack of curses like Amplify Damage and the obvious lack of Corpse Explosion, in terms of flexibility though, it brings a lot more to the table, and is actually a bit more low gear friendly, since you don't need access to teleport to reposition your army onto a single target, since you can just resummon them there. Something the Necromancer can never do with anything other than a Golem. Now, while the build is not 100% where I would like to see it be, it is now fully capable of standing in my personal B tier list of builds that can go through the entirety of the game on all difficulties without too much hassle, even if it's not the fastest thing out there. The main thing holding it back from being A tier territory, which are builds that are able to beat the game at a reasonable speed and challenge, is the Druid's lack of consistent support for them. Sure, you have spirits and you can keep them up most of the time, but they're also much less reliable than Necro Curses or Paladin Auras, that does hold it back a little bit for this build. That said, even with some minor tweaks or new rune words, things could be a lot better for this build and able to be taking it to the next level. So as patches 2.5 and 2.6 release, we're likely to see this build grow from competent to competitive, unless they just completely ignore every aspect of it from here on out, especially if the rune words they've been introducing for latter Season 1 are any indicator of their future plans for potentially buffing up unloved things in the game. As far as the build we tested over on Twitch, we of course went full tilt, with 20 points in Grizzly, 20 points in Direwolves, 20 points in Spirit Wolves, and 20 points in Heart of the Wolverine. And then we went with our spare points into Raven, which got us about 15 points at the base, and 1 point wonder into Shockwave to help our minions out by stunning enemies. And the reality is, unless you're going after Bale and want to use that on Lister and his pack, that Shockwave is far from necessary. It's even bordering on near useless. So instead, I'd probably go full in on Ravens instead, only maybe getting a shapeshift after for, say, life purposes. But Cyclone Armor could be a fairly reliable alternative there too, since most of what threatens you will be elemental. As far as the spirit, in terms of untwinked, I would actually try to get that Heart of the Wolverine up, but if you're transitioning over to Summoner with endgame gear, kind of like we have here, it's a bit less important, since we already have the bases it covers with our own personal and minion auras. So you do actually have some flexibility to invest those points elsewhere as well, just in case you actually did want to go somewhat deeper into the shapeshift and go into a hybrid there, instead of less into the shapeshift like we were recommending for going full hardcore summon. As far as the minion auras go, we used a Might Mercenary from Act 2 and gave him an Infinity. This was to ensure that our chances to hit were as high as possible, and as usual, the use of Infinity easily doubled our speed with this build versus the non-Infinity tests I did off screen. As far as more budget options, you could just stick with the Might Mercenary and use something more like a Reaper's Toll to cut through physical resists, Obedience to make him punchy, or even just a solid mid-tier unique or rare spear or polearm to just give him something hard to hit with. Equipment-wise, we focused extremely heavily on the plus skills for our main gear slots on the stream, namely Jalal's main since we were running a Bear Shift, though if you go pure Summoner, you can get away with everything from a Harlequin Crest to a Druid Circlet for just the plus all skills. Though Jalal's is still a pretty solid option even if you aren't using shapeshifting, since it provides you with resist, stats, mana per kill, and plus skills, though you probably won't get much from that mana per kill unless you're going into, say, elementals or something like that, which, in the end, this is a pretty good helmet for this build regardless. On the amulet, I went with Mara's for the plus all skills and resist, because Druid is one of the few classes I do not have a good caster amulet for, which can make a difference if you're running Werebear, since the casting speed of Shockwave is considered a spell animation, much like Warcry on the Barbarian, and it is much easier to spam with a high-end faster cast. That said, with our setup here, we do hit the target breakpoints, but a caster amulet would actually free up our gloves to make us able to actually do more in the way of melee, so it is an important concern if you are going into the realm of Shapeshifter Summoner hybrid. On the gloves, we're actually using Trangools for faster cast to maintain that minimum cast speed while we're using our Pride swap, though do always check your faster cast tables when you're using stuff like Shockwave to make sure that you're at the speed you want. With the changes to attack speed, you could use an increased attack speed set here and go for a hybrid melee and summon build like I mentioned before, which I think would generally be one of the main approaches people will take with this build instead of relying solely on summons, likely sacrificing Heart of the Wolverine Wolverine, as we mentioned earlier, for a melee skill, either on the bear or wolf form, depending on which they prefer. Across the rings and belts, we're all plus skills with Dual Stone of Jordan and Arachnid's Mesh, mainly because we wanted to focus on those summons. If you stick with pure summons, I would stick with this setup. If you go hybrid wereform and summon, I would likely swap these out for a Leech Ring, Ravenfrost, and String of Ears, or even a Thunder God's Vigor on the belt to aid your tankiness and give you a bit less fear of cold and lightning damage, and also give you, if you have the right stuff, a bit more punch and a bit better chance to hit. On the boots, we're using War Travelers for a pinch of Magic Find, which works out fine, and they're actually really solid if you're going melee too, because they have that little bit of added damage, though you would probably want to swap them out for Gore Riders or Goblin Toe for Crushing Blow. If you're staying Pure Summoner though, there really isn't much here to help you, so Magic Find or Resist are going to be your main goal. On the armor, I went with Chains of Honor, since I was planning on being shifted and doing Shockwave support to keep the minions alive, which it does work well against tough enemies like Lister, but was superfluous against most normal enemies. For the Shapeshifter hybrid version, I would lean into Fortitude, or barring that, just a good resist armor like Guardian Angel or something, or a good attack speed armor like Treachery, which also, coincidentally, gives you resist, if you proc the Fade at least. Now for Pure Summoner who doesn't shift at all, a lean into Enigma is another good choice. Besides Chains of Honor for resist, you could have Enigma for Teleport, which it has all the good plus skills and all that other stuff as well. Obviously, Enigma is the more expensive option, but yeah, there really is not a cheap teleport option other than, say, packing a teleport staff on your swap for if you don't have Pride or something like that yet. Weapon-wise, we have two weapon sets here, with a caster setup that would actually be your goal if you're going Pure Summoner as well, and generally you would actually have something like this on swap if you're going melee too, and that is Heart of the Oak for good plus skills and resist, and Spirit Shield for more plus skills and some resist. They both also have faster cast, though we are generally going to be in a bit excess of what we need, so Pure Summoners would be able to free up their gloves for more resists. Obviously, the budget option for Dual Spirit would work fine too, since that's just one plus skill less than this, and it's still fully functional. In terms of the swap, we've got Pride on this one for extra minion damage, because we are mostly a summoner, and there is a noticeable boost in speed while using it for the minions, though do remember Infinity is orders of magnitude more important than Pride, because you need to be lowering the enemy defense to make your chance to hit with the majority of your minions hit a reasonable percent, even at higher levels. That's why we put Infinity on the Mercenary. Pride is just the icing on the cake. As we've mentioned, the shift alternative, weapons like Reaper's Toll, would work for that really well, because, well, it's fast and it does decent damage, and it also causes Decrepify, which provides physical piercing for stuff like Ravens, Direwolves, and the Grizzly Bear, though it's not entirely necessary since the amazing Spirit Wolves actually can surprisingly, I was shocked by this, they can carry their own weight against physical immunes. I was not expecting that. Overall, our tests of the Summoner Druid, both on-screen and off-screen, have shown that this build is now a lot more viable, and they can have a decent amount of utility for expensive builds as we see here, but also for super budget builds focused on cobbling together plus skills on the cheap for making their way through, say, normal, nightmare, even in through hell. And with the changes to Thorns coming down the pipeline, a Thorns Mercenary could actually come back to being a reasonable progress option for this as well, since all your minions are freely summonable without corpses, and therefore can be continually stacked on bosses for reflected punishment with the new hybrid thorns that combines percent and just flat damage. And of course, as always, if you found this interesting, hit that like button and leave a comment about whether you'll be playing a summoner or even a summoner hybrid druid in 2.4.